Hi there, welcome to the Animals Naturally podcast with me, Suzanne. The aim of this podcast is to give you ideas and tips on how to care for your animal more naturally. Whether your animal is large or small, there's a whole world of complementary therapies and holistic approaches that you can use to help your animal have a more naturally healthy lifestyle. I'm founder of Taranet, a leading international natural animal healthcare resource at taranet.co.uk. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to talk to you about how you can worm your horse or dog more naturally. Worms are a fact of life. Whether you have a horse or a dog, and some other animals too, they all can get worms. Unfortunately, these worms can cause a great deal of discomfort and even serious illness or death if they're not effectively managed. So having a good worming regime is vital. But where do you start? Your veterinary surgeon will be able to advise you on a programme for your horse or dog. This may involve using chemical wormers to get rid of the worms, although now there's an increasing acceptance that chemical wormers are not necessarily a good thing to use very often, as it can lead to resistance and ultimately them not working at all. There are natural ways that you can use to control your animal's worm burden, so your horse or dog can have a happy and healthy life without worms. First of all, I'll talk to you about how you can help control worms in horses holistically. So the first tip to help your horse is to keep pasture land free of manure. So what do? You need to take your wheelbarrow and a pooper scooper and pick up the manure. It's as simple as that. Ideally do this daily. It is possible if you've got the money and you can buy worming machines, sort of pooper scooper that does it automatically behind pulling a quad bike, for instance, where you can have it done for you, going around on a field on your little tractor or your quad bike. But for many of us, we can't afford that, or it's just not possible. So having your wheelbarrow is the best thing. Do this at least 3 times a week. Not only will doing it regularly make it a less time-consuming task, but it will not give any worms in the manure time to get into the ground. If they do get into the ground, then over time they'll be ingested again by your horse, and so the circle continues. Also, the benefit of having a clean pasture free of manure will reduce it getting horse sick, or what's called horse sick. So basically the horses overgraze it and it just looks overgrazed and weeds grow. So although inevitably some weeds will appear, you can pick these while you're at poo picking. So keeping your pasture land free of manure can have multi benefits as well as controlling worms. It gives you a chance to check your animal's fencing as well to make sure all is in order. Second tip to help your horse's holistic worming regime is to do worm counts. So there's several companies. I use one called Westgate Labs, but there are many others too, and even some veterinary surgeons and other leading country stores also do this service, where you basically send a sample of your horse's manure, and they actually measure it to see, or look inside it to see if there's any worms. So why bother doing that? Well, it means if you know whether your horse, pony or donkey has worms. They may not, but if they do, you'll know at what level and if any worming is required. There's many different worms that can affect your horse, pony or donkey, so a worm count is a great way to know what your equine has, if any. So how often should you do a worm count for your horse, pony or donkey? Well, ideally, do this every 12 weeks. So you may be thinking that sounds quite a lot, but different worms are more prevalent at different times of the year. So having worms about all the time is unfortunately something you need to accept. And by knowing what type of worm your horse has, then it makes it better if you do need to use a wormer as what one you should use. Tapeworm tests is a third tip. There's a special tapeworm test that's done by using your horse's saliva. Your veterinary surgeon or companies like Westgate Labs offer this test. Like the manure test, the tapeworm test will assess whether your horse has any tapeworm burden and if a worm is required. Other methods of testing the tapeworm, including your veterinary surgeon completing a blood test and sampling the blood for evidence of tapeworms. The fourth tip is wormers. Well, you may already have heard of wormer resistance. Basically, resistance means some wormers will not work effectively to remove all worms. This is because worms have got resistant to it, they've got used to it and not taking any notice, basically. So it's important to only worm your horse when you really need to. So when you've done a worm count or tapeworm test and it's clear your horse, pony or donkey does have worms. Different wormers have different active ingredients. It's always a good idea to change your wormer to try and avoid resistance, so don't use the same one year after year, and only use them if you absolutely have to. But it is possible to use natural products to help promote your animal's intestinal hygiene. There's different herbs that can be used to help promote good intestinal hygiene. My favourite product is something called VermX. So the company is called VermX, VERM-X. It's all natural. Best of all, the horses or my equines certainly don't mind eating it. If you have ever had difficulty administering a wormer paste into your horse, pony or donkey's mouth, you'll know that's a massive benefit. So does it work? Well, due to strict regulations on what can be said, VermX can't say that the products do work to eliminate worms. But having had a horse myself with a positive worm count and so needing a wormer, me then using VermX and then doing another worm count that afterwards that showed there were 0 worms, I know it does work. But obviously every animal is different. But I do urge you to try VermX. It's a natural approach, and that's got to be better than using chemicals wherever possible. If chemical wormers do have to be used, then if they're only used infrequently, there'll be less chance for your horse to develop resistance to them, and they'll be more likely to work. But be sure to use the most appropriate one for what worms are present. And if you're not sure what you should be using, speak to your vet or a company like Westgate Labs or an authorised worming advisor, which are based in many leading equine stores. So there's some top tips for helping manage your horses or pony or donkey's intestinal hygiene and prevent or reduce the worm burden and manage your horse's worm count. So how can you help your dog? Well, there's several types of worms that can affect dogs too. These include heartworms, hookworms, roundworms and tapeworms. They can be transmitted in various ways and can cause serious health damage if they're not managed. So for your dog, you can also get your dog's poop tested for worms. By doing this, you'll know whether you'll need to take any particular action to reduce worms. For wormers, you can buy many different types of wormers for your dog too, but it's possible to have a natural approach. VermX is again my go-to product. VermX offer a range of products that are suitable for many animals, different ones for horses, different ones for dogs, different ones for chickens, etc. My dogs love the crunchies that can be used every day. They contain herbs that promote good intestinal hygiene, so it's an essential part of a holistic regime. So the principles are the same really for horses or dogs in terms of doing worm counts, using wormers targeted, but using a natural product like VermX as well can really help. And as I say, for horses, picking the pasture up free, making sure manure is free, is a really vital part of the process too. So I hope that's been useful and given you some ideas on how you can look after your horse or dog's worm management programme so they stay as healthy as possible. As I said at the beginning, worms can be very serious. If they're not effectively managed, then your horse or dog can get a variety of ill health, and this may not happen immediately. It sometimes can, but sometimes it can take many years, many months for illnesses to develop. So certainly something you do need to be aware of and taking action on. And you may be thinking, what's the cost of all this? Well, certainly for time, you need to spend time thinking about it, time picking up the manure, time doing worm counts. But in terms of the expense, if you're buying worm tablets regularly for your vet or another source that are chemical based, they soon add up over time as well. And certainly having a holistic approach and using products that are more natural wherever possible, that's got to be better. I hope that's been helpful. Please do share this with anybody you know who would also find it helpful to understand how they can help their horse, pony or donkey or dog and having a natural worming programme. If you need more information on complementary therapies for your animal, then do visit my website at taranet.co.uk. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.